thanks again for joining me. Super Dave here, another episode of Bleeding Edge Interviews. And you know, I get jazzed when I get to talk to new artists or rising stars in the prog world. And I've been able to do that a lot this year. Matter of fact, my videos have really very heavily favored the up-and-comers, the rising stars. This time it's Nospūn. We got Phil Rich on vocals, and we got bassist Cole Millward, who were nice enough to join me for a very long, sit back, get comfortable, very long conversation. But you know what? It flew by. It was great. It was an awesome time. I think you'll find out that these guys are exceedingly talented and exceedingly thoughtful about what they're doing. And there's a reason this album, Opus, their debut, the reason that this album is so hot right now in the prog world. So sit back, relax. Phil Rich, Cole Millward of Nospūn, talking about their new album, Opus, right now. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. I appreciate your time. Glad to get to talk to you guys. Always fun to talk to rising stars that are making waves, which is what you guys are absolutely doing at this point in time.
Thank you.
Oh, good.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, can't help but notice talk of, and you know what? Among the things that you usually take care of before maybe you start officially recording is making sure I got the pronunciation correct. It's Nospūn?
That's correct.
Okay. The line over the U is indeed functional.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
We'll get back to that in a moment, but you start noticing the name Nospūn popping up a lot in the progosphere, as I call it. And you start hearing some good things, and you go, all right, let me go check this out. Check it out, and you go, okay. The good things I'm hearing are in fact founded. They are valid, and they are very cool. So welcome to the world of prog rock, prog metal in the greater blogosphere, progosphere, whatever you want to call it. You've gotten some attention. So kudos.
Thank you. We're super happy to be here.
Yeah. Excellent to talk to you. So real quickly here, Nospūn. Curious about the origin of the name, because I Googled that. I don't think I found a definition, but I may have given up too easy.
Cole, you want to take that one?
Sure. So a little hard to talk about it without somewhat mentioning a little bit of the band history. We're not technically totally new to this world, I guess. We sort of have existed in sort of various forms as a band for quite some time, like at least a decade.
Wow. Okay.
By this point, like we started when we were teenagers, and you know, we've had some like members come and go over time, but like and therefore, of course, we've gone through a few different names over time. And as we started working on this particular album, there was this real sense of like, this feels a little new. Like there's, you know, some of the members who have been around for all of this time, but we think it's time to sort of present this as a new thing, not just a continuation of what came before, but like this deserves a new name, sort of new branding, all of that stuff. And so we sort of started on what I think might be the hardest thing that a band ever has to do, which is coming up with the name.
Right.
I honestly think that's true, because like with these guys, I have the easiest time writing music.
Right.
But we had the hardest time coming up with the name. That just always seems to be the case. And we wanted to pick something that sort of like connected all of us, so that it wasn't just like something that only like one of us had some sort of reference to. So we all kind of are into the Matrix films, right? Because like good sci-fi, good action films, all that stuff. And of course, there's the famous line in there, you know, there is no spoon thing. And so we're like, oh, that's kind of a funny thing. Yeah.
Can I jump in to my favorite part of the story? It's not just the band that also has a reference to the name. It's the production studio that Cole and our guitarist James co-own and run.
Oh, wow.
Called Giant Spoon Productions.
Nice.
And that name came about, and thus Nospūn came about because back when we were known by another name, we were cutting our teeth on recording for the first time by ourselves.
Yeah.
Because this entire album was done in house. And when we were working out the kinks in that process, we were basically running it out of, at the time, Cole's bedroom. And I go over one day to like record some, because at the time I think I was still playing rhythm. I went over there to like record some guitars or some vocals or something for our last piece of our last initial EP. And there was this 3 foot by 1.5 foot giant silver spoon just mounted on the wall in the middle of right in the middle of the wall.
That's
and I walk in and I was like, so Cole, what's with the giant spoon? And he turns around like he's been waiting on this question, and with this like almost evil grin, grinning through his teeth, there is no spoon.
Yep.
And thus, Giant Spoon was born, and later on, Nospūn.
Nospūn.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. That is perfectly the word I'm looking for. Esoteric in nature.
It's very weird and meta, and then of course like the spelling was sort of a thing that we decided as like a as like we knew that if we wanted to be searchable online, it kind of had to be like a word that didn't exist yet, so that we would definitely pop up on like the first page. And so we were like, okay, Nospūn, that's cool. A nice sort of meta reference to like all of these things that sort of interconnect us, but like we can't just spell it normally, we have to spell it weird. And so we were all kind of laughing about it, but at the end of the day we were kind of like, I mean, there's if there's a band out there called Spock's Beard, I feel like we can can get away with this just odd spelling of a weird reference as a name, and I think that quirkiness sort of fits the nature of the band dynamic pretty well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a funny idea. Not a funny idea, but it's a very modern idea, because it's not the first time I hear people talking about the idea of, I don't just want a name that is original. I want a name that's easy to search, that comes up quickly in the Google results. And, like it's really in and of itself, it's a reflection of the modern age, where we live, is that you can't just necessarily be original as easily and it be I guess as accessible as easily as if you have something really unusual and creative at the same time. So you guys have done it on both levels there. Multi-level thinking.
I feel like so many, like with how many people there are out here sort of doing this thing, like almost every band name you can think of has kind of already been explored in some way, or just like all of these names are sort of already taken, with so many people being creative about it. And so coming up with something that is truly new as far as band names goes, pretty difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
Hardest part of being in a band, coming up with a name.
As the kids would say, true dat.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, that's again great to meet you guys. This is I can already tell this is going to be fun, because we're making Matrix references right off the bat.
Yeah.
So you guys have been around for like 10 years now. What chain of events came about at this point that led to you making this album? Like what if you've been around for a while and you hadn't made a debut, now you did, so something changed, right?
I would say so. At least for me. On a personal level, because like I said, we had different iterations of this particular collective, plus or minus members, always in some sort of progressive format, right? We always love prog metal, leaning harder into like old school, like Dream Theater and Symphony X for our like very like initial, like getting our toes wet, very garage band. Then we went through an iteration where it was very like gent oriented, like what, mid 2000s,
Okay.
mid late 2000s.
Yeah.
That, we discovered bands like Periphery and the Contortionists, and it hit home. So we explored that, and you can hear some of that in our sound.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think what really happened was, at least for me, there was a level of maturity that was reached where life kind of like happened, got in the way. Like, for instance, I got married, had a baby.
Right.
And it got to a point where the time that I was investing in the project was not fulfilling me like it used to. And it's because we didn't realize we had found like a particular like formula that was working. And we didn't realize like what we had in each other, like as members.
Yeah.
Like that we had kind of stumbled onto the secret sauce completely by accident. We had no idea. Right. And so when we, started tampering with that and trying and experimenting, we lost it. And for me, it was so far gone that I would come home after, trying to, write or record or something like that. And I was so like no longer enjoying it. Right. That my wife said, I kind of need you here. So if you're going to leave and you're not going to get something out of it, why not just like let it go?
Yeah.
And I actually did. Like I actually stepped away from the group for a while, and that stung because I think 3 of us in this band are like the founding members. And so to be one of the founding members and step away from like my baby, it broke my heart. And a series of events took place. We all basically got the band back together as like its original founding members, because we realized, oh my God, I don't think we realized what we had, because we tried other things and it didn't work. Like none of it worked. And what did work didn't feel good. It wasn't a fun time. And so getting this particular group of individuals back together, it clicked all over again. We were off to the races. And I think for me, it was a realization of, hey, we might have found it by accident, but we can keep it on purpose.
It's almost sort of like we, like, even though this is sort of like the proper debut as Nospūn, it's kind of like we've already gone through like as much of like band drama as we possibly can beforehand, hopefully to so that like going forward, hopefully we won't have to deal with that quite as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm inclined to agree. We've had sort of a little bit of like a revolving door kind of thing with like some different members, like keyboardists and drummers and stuff over time. And at some point we realized, we're just sort of looking back, we're like, hey, like that sort of period of time around like 2012, 2013, like the group of us that were going on at the time, that was like the most fun that this had ever been. And we were like writing the coolest stuff at the time. So maybe we should sort of like get back to that.
Right.
Yeah.
And, we'd already sort of started working on this album by that point. We'd already been like writing and going through the process of learning how to put together like a really kick-ass like prog concept album.
Yes.
And everything. And it had sort of its ups and downs in terms of like its progress, how we were able to move forward with it. And I think to what Phil is saying is like, once we had that realization about like the right group of members to make it happen, it was like all of a sudden everything clicked, and it just like progress started going so smoothly, where there had been periods of like a couple years where it just felt like we were waiting for the mentality to be right about to finish writing and producing this record and everything. It felt like pulling teeth at times to get everyone to sort of like collaborate on it and work right, to everyone's frustration. Right. And then, the moment that we realized, it's like we just need to get the right group of people. And the moment that we did, it was like just 0 to 60, like within a span of months. After that point,
Like,
we finished the album.
To put it into perspective, I think Cole, James, some of my vocal bits came in later, but Cole, James, and at the time we had a keyboardist who was helping do some of the keyboard bits. I think they wrote a majority of the music in the span of about, what, a year?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, God, 5 years later, 5.5 years later.
Yep.
Wow.
Before I came back.
Yeah.
Because like somewhere in that span of 5.5 years, it had slogged down to such like a crawl. And I couldn't wrap my head around what was going on. Nobody really could. It was just like plodding along. And I'm like, this feels like it's dead in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Like this album's never going to happen. And, life happens and you got to pay the bills and all that. And so I took time off. And when we basically put those pieces back together, like Cole said, in less than 6 months, everything just,
wow.
And we had a debut. And I think the proof is kind of in the pudding a little bit. We didn't really expect this.
Yeah.
Like to, be talking to some of the people we're talking to and having interviews like this and being put on blogs and like top 10 lists, like Prog record or Prog song of the week on certain websites and things like that. Like that's foreign. Because like Cole and I have said, we're not new. We've released music before, but never music that did anything like this.
Yeah. Not on this level. And, and it's interesting because it kind of links into one of the questions I had in my head to begin with, was the idea that out of the gates, this album struck me as something that had been polished really, really, really to a high shine. More so than you tend to have expected from a band that is putting out their debut. Like most debuts have, some rough spots here and there, and they get some things that, maybe seem like they haven't quite fully cooked yet. They haven't quite fully gestated. And, I think one of the things for me, because I do my research before I start to do an interview, so I hopefully don't sound like an idiot, but so I know something a little bit what's going on. But always looking for the interesting angles. You guys didn't have a lot out there written about you except reviews of the album. And what I was reading is like, okay, well, nobody else seems to have information I don't already have, which is in some ways both liberating and intimidating because I got nothing to hang on to and I've just got to explore on my own. But it dawned on me, I'm like, as I listen to this album, as I read these lyrics, I'm like, this is not somebody's first steps. This is something that has been worked on pretty meticulously for a while, I got to think. So sounds like that sound, that appearance is in fact accurate. You guys have really been working on this for an extended period of time. This didn't just pop up out of the blue. It's been given some time to really form solidly before being put out as a product.
So I have a lot to say about this.
Take it away, Cole.
Yeah. So I definitely think there's just a lot that you learn in the years of being a band, and most of our experience has been in sort of in the local sphere. We're from Charlotte, North Carolina, so most of our experience is in sort of that Charlotte area. And there's a whole slew of challenges that you face as a local band, everything from, pay to play battles of the bands to, just like unreliable business people, and like you learn like the different bands to work with and everything, and you just sort of develop a sense for the way things go. And we in our earliest iteration of this band, we recorded an album and everything, some of the first music that we ever wrote, and it did not turn out the way that we wanted it to. We sort of had a sound in our heads that was like, oh, this is gonna be so cool. We're gonna be like Dream Theater and everything. And then the album that came out of that was so disappointing in so many ways. Like the the sound wasn't there. It was basically as though it hadn't really been mixed. And in fairness, a lot of the people who were working on it were sort of doing like pro bono work. So there's only so much you can expect from that. And, you know, it was easy to see some of our immaturities as songwriters. And we just sort of felt like, wow, this kind of feels like local band work, you know? And that sort of started us down a road of, we want to learn how to produce our own records. Like, we want to learn how to do the audio side, like basically every part of it. We want to learn to be able to do that ourselves, because we never want to go into a studio again and come out of it with an album that we don't like or that we're not proud of. Right. And so we ended up writing another EP and recording that all ourselves. And we're really proud of that music. Again, from sort of the previous iteration of the band, really proud of that. But of course, that was like one of the first things that I ever mixed.
Yeah.
Because I'm the recording and mixing and mastering engineer on for the band, essentially. And so we're really proud of the music itself, but the mix is still very novice level, I would say. And so after that,
do we want to plug the name?
What for the old music, or?
Yeah, just so that people have a history, you know, like, because Nospūn feels like it dropped out of nowhere, and if anybody was interested, you know, and it actually ties back into why we changed the name. The previous iteration of this group was known as Ozai.
Oh,
for all you fans, Avatar: The Last Airbender, yes, that is a Fire Lord reference, which is why we had to change that name, because back when we formed that band, what, 05?
Somewhere around,
No. That's too early.
Like 2013 or something, 2012,
2013. Right. It hadn't blown up on Netflix. You know, it kind of ran its time on Nickelodeon and died. And so we all thought, hey, it's a cool name. Why not? And so we used it. There weren't any other acts at the time. Then it sort of like reawakened on Netflix, turned into like a multi-million-dollar name.
Right.
And now there's like 13 Ozais that you can find readily available on like Apple Music, Spotify, and whatnot. And so we're like,
yeah. And
okay.
Then now we also look like bandwagoners, even though we've been on it for years ahead of time. But and it was always like you would search that name, and that was never the first thing that would come up. It was always the actual show. Yeah.
And we weren't thinking that far ahead at the time. Like, we were still, you know, just wanting to come up with a cool band name, you know. And so this time around, there was another thing we learned, is like, you know, pain from experience.
Right.
Yeah. That's true.
But
so
that music. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Cole. Take it away.
Sorry. Ultimately, where I was going with that was like around the time that I was sort of learning how to do this, how to do like music production and stuff. I was listening to these records where the sound was so immaculate, where the mix was like, it was the greatest metal mixes that I've ever heard in my life. And I was so inspired by that. And I was just like with the way audio technology is right now, and, you know, like, you can get yourself a copy of Pro Tools or Cubase or whatever, and there's all these plugins out there that are constantly on sale. These things just make the music sound great. The only thing that's missing is the know-how. The only thing that's missing is the experience. And so it's like there's no reason, there's no like monetary barricade to keep us from having an album that sounds as good as the best sounding albums out there. The only thing that's missing is our own experience.
Yeah.
And so part of that, you know, 5, 6, 7 years that we worked on this album was not just, you know, like coming up with the music and like lyric writing and refining the parts and stuff, but like recording demos and then recording them again, and then deciding, okay, it's time to record the final album, and then recording those parts over and over again. Like our song, The Death of Simpson, track 3 off of the new album. I recorded the bass tracks for that song no fewer than 10 times.
Wow.
And it wasn't because like, oh, like I'm just not satisfied with my performance. It was like I would record the bass track and be like, yeah, that's cool. And then I would learn something new. I would get a new piece of gear or a new bass or something like that. And I'd be like, well, now I have to re-record those parts again.
Yeah.
And that just happened so many times to where like after the final time I was actually like happy with it. I was like, I cannot allow myself to touch this again. I'm getting so tired of recording this one song over and over again. And so there was just this process of like all of us going back and forth while I was learning to mix properly, where we were all sort of mixing it together to a certain extent. That like, you know, I would put out a revision of the mix, and everyone would be like, "No, like this doesn't sound right." Like, you know, just like all kinds of feedback, and you know, doing that over the course of several years, and sort of constantly holding it up next to those albums of mine that are like my favorites that I think sound the best, and
Right.
being like, are these comparable? Like, if I play ours and then one of my favorites, or vice versa, like, do I feel a difference? Do I feel a difference in quality? Do I ever feel at any point that like, okay, cool, yeah, the super awesome commercial mix is over. Now our song kicks in. Does it still sound like a local band, right? Or does it maintain that level of like quality? Could you tell that we're not like a big label supported band or anything, and we weren't going to be satisfied with releasing the album until we hit that point? If it took us another 3 years to do it, that's what it was going to take.
Wow.
We just had to wait it out.
Yeah.
And truthfully, the music was a little bit the same. It was like Phil said, a lot of the music was done between me, our guitarist James, and our keyboardist at the time, David, sort of working on it. And there was very much this mentality of this album has to be perfect in every single way in our own eyes. Like musically, every note has to be intentional. Nothing can be. I don't know. We had some of that early immature musician thing going on years ago, where it's like, oh, that's a cool guitar riff, I'm going to write a cool bass part to go along with it. But they don't necessarily complement each other. It's just like a cool guitar part and a cool bass part, not a cool song.
Yeah.
Right. And it was that maturity that came later, I think, that sort of really bloomed with this album.
Yeah.
That was us making sure that every single, and I mean every single note on the album was intentionally chosen and honestly argued over for hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to get loud, but
no, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And we're just having, you know, like Vietnam flashbacks over that, basically, you know?
Yeah.
So
there's ups and downs to that. I think, of course, the big thing is the fact that if you channel all of that into making something that is, as you said, intentional, is exactly what you want it to be and sounds the way you want it to be, you can walk away from the experience with something that sounds great. And you can
I still don't get tired of listening. Yeah. I still don't get tired of listening to our record.
Yeah.
And that might sound pretentious, and I really don't mean it to be, but I hold it up there with some of my favorite records of all time.
Nice.
And it's because it's just that.
Yeah.
It is exactly what we wanted to hear. In fact, I think that's part of what spawns like the creative spark to begin with.
Yeah.
Is like, my favorite bands aren't producing enough music to satiate that need. And so like, let's make some more, you know?
There you go. That's the upside. And that's like, if I understand correctly, then Cole, you have a studio. You own and run a studio, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Our guitarist James and I co-own and
Nice.
run the studio. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Giant Spoon Productions.
I think somewhere along the line I gotten the impression, and I don't know where I got this from now. I'm questioning my own sanity, but that's daily. The idea that you had recorded it essentially at home with your own kind of in-home studio, which maybe is what this is. And so it's the same thing, or it's not. Now I'm not sure what I heard.
We do actually have. We now have a small studio space close to downtown Charlotte.
Oh, cool.
It's far from like the biggest or most fully featured studio, but our mentality is kind of like, if you're coming to us to record, you're not necessarily coming there because you're hoping to see $1 million console in the control room or something. You're coming there because you've heard our work and you want that on your project is essentially what it is. But the process of producing the album, like getting that studio space, was something that happened during the process of producing the album. So the earliest parts of the production, like the earliest guitar and bass tracks, were definitely recorded here in my living room. Just I have my own sort of like personal home audio space, and a lot of it was just hooking up the gear and just tracking away here with our free time.
Wow. And that's, again, another one of those modern world things, because at this point in time, this will be the third interview I've done with people in a band that debuted a prog metal album this year. That one was recorded in a cabin, one was recorded, in your studio more or less at home, one was recorded remotely from 5 or 6 people across the world emailing their parts in, and they all sound amazing. And I'm sitting here thinking, how screwed are the producers out there? They are so no longer needed that people can make this stuff that sounds so great, like you guys are doing.
Well, I guess the tricky part of that is like, there's definitely, so I mean the audio industry has definitely like increased and bloomed and become a lot more available to everyone because of technology. The fact that we can do all of this this recording and honestly very quick editing. This is not like the old days where editing meant physically cutting pieces of tape with scissors. Like you can do
Did that.
you can do the equivalent of a whole day's worth of tape cutting in a matter of minutes now.
Honestly, it was such a step up from the stone tablets that I was very happy to be able to cut the tape.
It's beautiful. Like I personally think that the technology is really beautiful, and the funny thing is, I think what that has forced us into is that it's the obstacle, like kind of like I was saying, the obstacle is no longer the like how much money you have.
Right.
It's not, do you have the money to get into a studio or to own the equipment yourself? Now it is, do you have the wherewithal to train your ear and to train your brain how to create a great record? Like for everyone who's sort of like putting out a great sounding record from home, there's a 1,000 other people at home with the same equipment and the same plugins who are just struggling to get their snare drum to sound right. And it's tough and it's a real struggle. And I mean, I really want to emphasize this. It's not something that like learning how to mix. It was not an overnight thing. It was a lot of pain. It was so much like comparing, like that process I was talking about of like comparing my mix to my favorite mixes is so demoralizing to think that you've like created a good sound and then to suddenly compare it to something sounds good and realize how utterly crappy yours sounds. It honestly makes me not want to touch my audio setup for a week. Wow. Because it's like it tells me how far I have to go. And so like it's kind of a there's two sides to the coin. It's that like it's totally amazing that we can do this from our homes now, but the challenge has really been put on like on our ears and our brains to be able to make it happen now.
And I like that you said two different things, because I think you can have like the intellectual wherewithal to be able to understand the process and like, pay lip service to what a mentor might be teaching you.
Right.
But there are some times where if you can't hear it, it doesn't matter if you have all of the know-how in the world.
Right.
A great example is I have known classically trained pianists who could play some of the most complicated like piano suites you could write, but they can't hear the notes.
Right.
If you ask them to sing the note back to you, they can't do it. And if you ask them to write anything, they're utterly incapable.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, they can replicate, and they have the knowledge to be able to tell you all the technique and why it works and how it works. But if you ask them to create you anything using that knowledge, they can't do it. And so I think, honestly, that's the question being like, what are producers going to do? And it's like, well, I think now what separates good producers from bad producers isn't money and gear. It's their ear and technique.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny you say that, because you're basically saying, you're describing the converse or the reverse or one of those things of what a friend of mine who tried to make a serious career as a musician and had some minor level of success, but he couldn't read a note of music at all, could read nothing. And he always said, look, music is sound. You need to be able to hear and know how to make the sounds you want to make. And so what you described is someone who knew how to read, had that so-called, I guess, book learning aspect of it, but didn't have the capability to take that sound and make something else out of it. So it kind of underlines it's not necessarily about how formal your training was or whether you can read music.
Right. In fact, I think it's more important to understand like the concepts, and to know your instrument, whatever it is, whether it's your voice or a bass or keyboard or whatever it is, like know how to get around on it.
Right. And
then train your ear. I think that's far more important than training your eyes.
Yeah,
I do. Our guitarist, I mean, if you've listened to the record, you know he is a technically proficient mother trucker. He knows what he's doing.
Yes.
I don't think he can read sheet music.
Yeah, probably can't.
Like if you put a page of like quarter notes and all that stuff in front of him, like I think he could get around on it.
Yeah.
But could he like
later.
sight read? I don't think so. Don't quote me on that, James. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. But I really don't think like you could throw him a piece of sheet music and he know what to do with it.
In his defense,
but if you said like if you started thwacking away, immediately he knows what key you're in, he knows what mode he's going to play.
Yeah,
he knows all the patterns in the mode if he wants to change it up, and then on top of that, he has an ear for what he likes to as well. So he could play like, hey, what if at this part we change to this? And he's proficient enough in his instrument that he can show you what's in his head just by playing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to read your music. He can play it just by listening to you and then spitting it right back out. And I've watched him do it. And it's
in his defense. I was like, I went to school for music and I learned how to read and everything, but like my life and career has not kept me up with my like sight reading training. And so like if you set a piece of sheet music in front of me, I can read it, but it's more like I have to translate it. It's just that's a skill you have to keep up with over time. So like even though I learned how to read it, it still wouldn't do me very much good. I agree that I think the bigger thing that I pulled out of music school was my ear as well, for sure. I think the ear.
And I think coming full circle, that's kind of what we're getting at is that if you're going to focus on something, like really focus on it, get good at your instrument and train your ear.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, clearly listening to the album, you guys are rather good at your instruments. And to a high degree. Hearing you already talk about the fact that Dream Theater is one of your original inspirations, I don't think there was a single review I read that did not basically say these guys are in the vein with Dream Theater and Haken. And that strikes me as very accurate. Clearly the chops are there, so I was kind of curious. I'm going to take the fact that you just flashed those horns and nodded, that you're very cool with that description. I was always curious, what's it like to be compared to other bands that way, whether you agree with it and whether you're cool with it, or whether you think some of these people are just going for the easy grabs. Because if you're going to grab a prog metal band, Dream Theater is the first one you're going to pick, and these days, you know what, Haken is very likely the second.
Yeah.
So I just have one thing to say to that. When the ugliest like diss you get from an online review is that you're a Haken ripoff band, I'll take that.
Yeah.
I don't think you're even close to the mark on that, just because I was there for the process of this being written. But if that's the ugliest thing you can think to say of this band, I'll take that every time. Awesome. Thank you.
It's not a horrible insult to receive, for sure.
No, I'll take that one.
Like, I feel like it would be a weird surprise and definitely a lie as well for us to say that we haven't spent our entire like careers, lives as musicians, like listening to and enjoying the work of Dream Theater, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, they sort of are the quintessential prog metal band. And our sort of aim, our style in the prog, like prog is such a weird like genre to try to define, because like I remember when I was first getting into it and I heard Dream Theater for the first time, I was like, I love this. And I just exhausted all of their discography. I'm like, I need to get more. Where can I listen to other bands that sound like Dream Theater? And the problem is that there are none. Like, there are other prog bands, especially at that time. There was like, I don't know, I gravitated to like Opeth, but Opeth doesn't sound like Dream Theater.
No,
they're prog metal, but they have their own thing. And Symphony X, okay, well, they have like some similarities, I guess, in that they're shreddy, but they're a lot more neoclassical than Dream Theater is. You've got Circus Maximus, who they kind of have a little bit more of like an 80s thing going on at the same time, but no one sounded just like Dream Theater. And so it's kind of hard to sort of, parse what makes a prog metal band, but just because they're sort of the quintessential prog metal band, I tend to think of them as up the middle of the road prog, like the things that you expect, or prog metal, at least what you expect to hear. Heavy riffs, really percussive drums, big epic sections, punctuated by heavy sections and more emotional sections and things like that. It's just a really wide-ranging thing. And so naturally, if we were going to go for that same middle-of-the-road prog thing, obviously we were going to be finding ourselves in that kind of description. But that sort of like perfectionist mentality that I mentioned earlier about like the writing and the production side has that same mentality has totally informed the way that we have approached our instruments like this whole time. We've like covered Dream Theater songs like individually. It's like, I want to sit down and practice. Let's learn a Dream Theater song. And it's always sort of been that way.
Right.
And we've just sort of gotten better at doing that with time, because, it's practice. And that James and I are also, we're both, and now Paul, our drummer as well, are music teachers. And so we're sort of constantly engaging with different techniques to improve, musical playing ability. It's kind of hard to preach it when you're not also living it yourself.
Right.
And so, like gradually over time, it's like we developed the taste for being able to play a lot of notes very fast. And just the perfectionist attitude of like, okay, I just played a lot of notes very fast, but was it clean? Did I feel like I said something with those notes? So yeah, it's kind of just part of the language we feel that we're speaking in order to be able to play that stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
Plus, going back to like the references, like with Dream Theater and Haken, I think we end up falling more in that camp with this record as opposed to like our previous EP as Ozai.
Right. Okay.
Because as Ozai, like I said, we leaned more into the gent influence.
Yeah.
Which sticks out. Like if you listen to that record, you'll hear it in the music that is written, and then also the vocals for that record. we were trying to emulate all of those style bands, and so there were harsh vocals as well as cleans.
Yeah.
On this one, A, to make it easier for me to reproduce on a nightly basis if we ever went on tour, we cut out a lot of the harshes, but also, as much as we loved Gent has less mass appeal. You can show Haken or Dream Theater to your mom, and she'll be like, "Oh, that's pretty cool."
Yeah.
I mean, like, it sounds silly, but it's the truth. Like, you can take it to your grandma and be like, "Hey, grandma, what do you think of this band?" And, James LaBrie's not going to, turn her ears to goo.
Yes.
And we liked that idea. We could still have our heavy, impactful riffs, but we didn't have to scream at you, Plus, it's better for conveying a message, which, being a concept album, you probably want to hear what we're saying. So it was both a stylistic choice out of necessity, to help convey the message, but also out of like forward thinking, I guess is the way I'm trying to think of it. Because the idea, going back to that earlier question when we were talking about like what brought about Nospūn and what brought about the record of Opus, and how did the band end up in this moment where we're at now. For me, it was really about not only realizing what we had, but getting serious about keeping it.
Yeah.
And so if we were going to get serious about making this our foray into the world, taking a real stab at it, instead of just being a bunch of kids in a garage band, what would appeal? And honestly, I don't really miss trading out the harshes for the singing. Don't. And if it's going to have a broader appeal, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. Makes total sense.
Yeah, I think we kind of felt that, there's definitely a lot of music that we like that has harsh vocals and everything. Meshuggah is one of my favorite bands. And they're only harshes.
Yes.
But like for our own music, it's kind of like a, we could take it or we could leave it. Like it doesn't really make a huge difference to us whether we have it in the music or not. And so the only other thing to consider is like, well, if it doesn't make a difference to us, who else's opinion should we consider? But like our sort of potential general listening audience. And the funny thing is, like, Phil's absolutely right. Like our Ozai EP that we did years ago has harsh vocals in it, and my parents, who are a little bit more casual listeners, will say they never cared for it. But they love Opus.
Right.
They think the new album is amazing. So I think that's, that sort of speaks to that. Look, we have a lot of friends and family who are sort of definitely not metal listeners, much less prog metal listeners.
Right.
And they still love the album. And that's honestly the most incredible thing to us. I'm always happy to hear that metalheads and prog noggins are into are into the.
Never heard that before.
That one credit for that, I think, goes to James's dad. I think he walked into our writing session one day. He's like, "What's up, you prog noggins?" We're like, "That's awesome."
That is amazing.
So
we're
I will
happy
take
that
to hear.
term to my grave now.
Oh, right.
Yes.
We're happy to hear when like that demographic loves the music, but there's also something like really special when, for total lack of a better term, the normies also enjoy it. It's like, wow, that's really cool. Like the same people that enjoy like Taylor Swift also enjoy Opus. That's tight.
When I borrow my wife's car, to go take our kid for an errand or something, and she's typically listening to like, K-pop and that sort of like genre of things, and she has our record like playing in the car. Nice. I'm like, yeah,
really cool.
By the way, sorry Sorry for our long-windedness. I don't know if you knew what you were getting into,
No
but
worries. I love it. I love the conversation. I love talking. That's amazing. But yeah, if you can sell the wife who's listening to K-pop on what you're doing, you know what? You've opened a door. That's all it takes.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you open a door to things. Years ago, I never would have listened to much of anything with harsh vocals because one, I can never much understand a lot of what they're saying. And at the same time, I'm an old head enough to go, I like my clean vocals. That's just the way it
Sure.
is. And I'm not ready to let go of that ever for an entire song. But, put on some Opeth, mix that in half and half, put on some ginger and watch Tatiana go at it. She's my metal goddess right now. But,
you and Paul both.
Yeah.
Our drummer P Dub.
Oh yeah,
we call him P Dub. That's his nickname. For Paul Wood, because his last name is Wood. That's his metal goddess as well.
The cat's called A Dub.
I love it.
Stands for attention whore.
Very good. Love that.
Yes. It is perfect.
Oh, you gave me ammo. That's wonderful. Thank you.
So, hey, there is a new album out. Let's talk about that for a moment. So this is a serious, again, it's one of those things you don't see often people doing first time out the door, which is a story-oriented conceptual album. And this is a story that's, to me, I think the word, it's not the word I want, but I forgot to go to thesaurus.com to find out the other ones, and parable came to mind. But it's essentially that there's a message in it. And as I started reading the lyrics, and I'm seeing it, and I'm going, well, this is starting off like I thought it was going to be a murder mystery, and then it became something entirely different. And by the time I wrapped up, I was like, okay, that's rather cool. So I guess there's something that inspired that particular story among you guys. Is that a personal origin, or is it more of an intellectual, philosophical origin to it? Because I've seen story-oriented conceptual albums come out of both.
Cool.
Okay, so the original story concept came from me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had it's funny, I kind of wish that I could say that the story idea came from a bunch of time of like sort of either personal or intellectual digging and trying to say something or whatever. But the original concept, which granted the album is quite different from its original concept, but it was a dream.
Wow.
It was a dream. Just that like the particular time in my life or place in my life that I was sort of in at the time that I came up with the concept, I wasn't getting very much sleep. And so when I did sleep, I slept really, really hard.
Yeah.
And would sort of, I say hallucinate because that's kind of what it felt like, but I was dreaming. I wonder if I like was snoring too much and like wasn't getting enough oxygen to my brain, and that's why I was seeing these things or whatever. But I woke up in the middle of the night just having experienced this story about a house and a bunch of people in the house and this seeming murder mystery kind of thing going on. But then, as dreams often do, it takes a hard left turn into weird sci-fi crap. But I woke up and I was like, I can remember every single detail from it, and so I like wrote it out into my phone, and over time we sort of refined out a lot of like the unnecessary extra stuff that like it doesn't contribute to the story, because like whereas with a book you may have page after page after page to describe every detail of what's going on in the world, with a concept album you only have so many lyrics to get the point across, and then everything else has to be music, right? And so we trimmed the story down to sort of the necessary parts. And what's interesting about it, like, even though it sort of came from what feels to me like an arbitrary origin, I definitely agree that there is these sort of like strange messages in there. But for me, it's like those messages became apparent to me over time, over the process of producing the album, not initially. Like there's legitimately, for me, there are lyrical moments that like after I wrote the lyrics, because most of the lyrics were written between me and Phil.
Right.
There are portions of lyrics that I wrote that I was just writing for story purposes. I was just trying to, tell the story, and then later realized these lyrics have a parallel in my life. And that's kind of frightening to me. Like, now I wonder how much of my life I have actually poured into these lyrics without knowing it. Just like there's in the album, the character of the protagonist, the character of the composer, talking about the sort of, one of the big themes is the frustration of trying to create the perfect work of music, but it's always like on the tip of your tongue. You can never quite get it out. I mean, and that's a little bit more on the nose, because obviously that's something that a lot of us feel when we're trying to like create our best work and we just can't get it out sometimes. It's writer's block.
Yeah.
But there were other like moments in the lyrics where I'm like, wow, this kind of feels like I'm talking about my relationship with other people or with my family or something like that. That totally was not intentional to begin with, but I began to interpret my own lyrics in sort of other ways after the fact. So I don't know. I kind of want to say it feels like the album sort of has a life to its own that revealed itself to me in kind of the same way that it might reveal itself to an actual listener.
Right.
So I agree. I think there's messages there. It's just kind of funny because a lot of them weren't intended to begin with. They just sort of, I don't know, became apparent.
Yeah.
So
there is like one or two like stories, messages, I guess you could say, in there that I personally feel came about because of when we got toward the ending of the song, of the writing process, right? Because I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, didn't we write Within the Realm last? Like
Within
the lyrics,
the Realm,
didn't we write the?
Yeah, Within the Realm was the last one to we're talking about our song Within the Realm of Possibility. That's the big old 15.5-minute epic. That I believe, yeah, right. That was the one to receive sort of like the bulk of its lyrical content. I don't know if I want to say it was the last one to receive a lyric, because I think maybe there were a couple songs that we were like, oh, there's a missing word here or there that we needed to add in or something.
But the crux of the story, I think, really fell upon that song when we were writing it, Cole and I.
Yeah.
Because I think the original way that the story was going to end, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't listened to the record, when the main character was going to basically right all of the wrongs, what was going to happen is they were actually going to be the character who went back. And they themselves were going to get to go and do all of these things.
Yeah.
And while we were trying to write it, that kind of stuck in my, pardon the old Southern expression, stuck in my craw a little bit. I didn't like the message, because Cole's right. As we kept writing and kept going about it, all of these messages that were really like relatable started popping out. And that was one where, no matter how I looked at it, the message that came across was, if you forgo living your entire life and all the experiences that there is to live, and only focus on the one thing with which you have no experience in, then it'll all work out in the end. So basically, like, him throwing his whole life away to focus on the song, the opus, would be rewarded by him getting to go back and live the rest of his life. And it's like, but that's not how life works.
Yeah.
You don't get a do-over. And so one of the ideas that was pitched was like, hey, we can do like two stories, two ideas to really get the listener to think about. Thing one is, what if he's not the one who gets to go back. He's got to send what he knows. He's got to pass on his experience, air quote, to the next generation.
Right.
He's passing on his knowledge to his younger self, which is something that happens in life anyway. He basically becomes his own father figure.
Right.
Right. And I already liked that. But then incidentally, what ends up happening is when we went back and started writing what happens in Back Yet Forward, the song that follows, what actually happened when the knowledge was passed on to him was the way he righted all of his wrongs was he started living life.
Yeah.
He got up earlier. He did the dance. He spent time with his family. Like, he actually started living all of the things that would give him the experience to write his opus.
Right.
And that's how I choose to interpret it. Other people might choose to interpret it different ways. But I liked the idea that two birds with one stone, you know, you might not get to be the one who fulfills your work, but that shouldn't mean you begrudge the next generation from experiencing or from benefiting from your experience.
Right.
And then the other one is you can devote all their time and effort into a thing, but unless you live life a little bit, was it really worth it?
Yeah.
And would you even have the experience to accomplish the thing you're setting out to do? Sometimes, especially like in this creative context, we talked about it already. The maturity of the writing changed. We grew older, we gained experience, and our writing changed. Our taste changed, and it blossomed into Opus, the album that we wrote together.
Yeah.
Would we have been able to do that? I mean, clearly the answer is no, because we didn't. You know, as a bunch of 18-year-olds playing in a garage band, we didn't have the experience yet. We hadn't lived life. So I liked, and I think it was more of an intentional like choice. That's one of the few stories in the album where it was like, let's hone in on that.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, the original plan for it was not anywhere near that deep, but I'm glad it got there.
Yeah. It's funny because, you know, to a large extent, what we've talked about as far as how you guys got from A to B and where you're at now is a lot of it was, it happened when it was ready to happen, almost, so to speak. That in some ways, almost as you talk about that, the album is semi-autobiographical because you weren't ready before you had the experiences. When you came back to it after having had the experiences, this is what the result was.
And see, that's what I'm talking about like going through and listening to it and being like, wow, that was not a meaning that I originally intended, but like it sure does work.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's beautiful. And I'm going to take that. I'm stealing that.
You enjoy.
Totally. We'll take that. You can take Prog noggins.
There we go. Quid pro quo, Clarice. The other, I think, message I got out of it too, is a certain sense, was the idea that he saved those other people through self-sacrifice as well. That in a certain sense, and some of it probably went slightly over my head, but there's that idea that he gave up some of that obsessive focus on the work. And the result was that he sort of, quote unquote, went back in time and saved the people that died by giving up on his self-obsession. So
right,
yeah,
because the way that story ends, it's like, you have time to recreate the work and get it exactly perfect.
Yeah,
but who will you have to share it with?
Right. A couple other things I noticed, and again, I visual the album cover. I'm curious about the exact concept of that because obviously, I think one, the idea that the house is isolated in a drop of water. There's also one of the VPs I've worked with at my job would talk about the idea of somebody drowning in a teardrop. The idea of just getting so overcomplicated with simple things that, and I'm sitting there going, I wonder if that was the idea behind the image there, because it almost could be that too, but I don't know. So,
wow. another meaning we can add to the list.
There you go. Write them down, guys. I'm giving you grist for the mill here.
That's actually that sort of reminds me of another one of those meanings that sort of made itself apparent to me over time. It's like this process that I've talked about like us learning how to produce a record, like all in all the technical sense, like learning how to record and mix and all of the complexities that go along with that. Like, and this is a little bit more about like my role in the band. I'm more of the technically minded guy, I guess. So I'm the one who reads manuals for fun. That's the way I'll put it out there. Like so many things that I've done, like in my own personal career, which is kind of crazy, have been like steps that were taken to make the band sound better, which is funny. Like, okay, cool, I have a studio thing now, but all of that came from the fact that I learned how to mix so that I could make this record. Right. I do guitar repair, right? But all of that kind of came from the desire to like mess around with my basses to make my bass tone sound better so that the band could sound better. Hell, even the reason that I went to like music school in the first place was so that I could learn how to, properly communicate like with music theory and learn better concepts and improve my ear so that I could make the band sound better. Right. It's like it all sort of has these connections to it. And I realized at some point, like one of the themes or one of the sort of events that happens in the album that I think a lot of people get a little confused about, because technically the events take place during an instrumental, which has no lyrics. So it's all interpretive or whatever. The protagonist, after a number of years of now being alone and still obsessing, it begins to resort to these things that are peripheral to what he's trying to work on, in the hopes that all of these peripheral things will make his opus work out in the end. Right. To which what happens, and it's sort of in the name of like 4D printing or whatever, he creates a machine or something that he sort of hopes will make the opus. This is after, like 50 years or whatever working on it, and it blows up, which he thinks is the end. But of course that leads to, the very trippy events of within the realm of possibility. Right. And I realized, like, sort of once again later, like I had a little bit of that was not a meaning that I originally implanted in it. But for me personally, it was like I started, like most of us do, just like trying to come up with cool sounding music.
Right.
And in the process, I have also sort of surrounded that with all these peripheral things like guitar repair and learning to do audio and everything. And it sort of had a personal meaning for me that was like let's make sure I'm not ignoring sort of the most important thing, which is actually like making the music. Like, let me not get so bogged down in like, did I wire my pickups correctly? or have I EQ'd my snare drum right? All of that to miss out on that. Like, am I actually creating music that feels self-expressive and things like that? Yeah. So and to that end, the drowning in a teardrop thing. Like, are we making things overly complex and sort of missing out on the actual, point of what we're doing? Yeah. But the album cover was sort of it's referential to events in the album. Right. Sort of, obviously, like all of the events of the album kind of take place in this house.
Yeah.
More or less. And so obviously, like that had to be included. I think on the cover, like the top room, like window is lit or something, which of course, it's reference to our character staying up late at night working on the opus and everything. And then being enclosed in that sphere over like the dark water is sort of the reference to the fact that both in metaphor and in the literal sense in the events of the album, the universe has collapsed around him to where his focus, his view of the world is becoming slowly more and more like focused on the one thing, to where it's beginning to cut out everything that surrounds him. So like metaphor, science fiction, literalism. I don't know. It's kind of up for interpretation, but there's lots of that in there for sure. And of course, we had to make it so that the album cover reflected that as best we could, and sort of gives away some of the spirit of the album, I guess.
Some of the other like little nitpicky details, like the water idea. I think we were initially trying to go for more like a snow globe or like glass. But we did some like rough sketches and it wasn't coming out right. Like we didn't like the look.
Right.
And we wanted to capture the idea that the bubble is like his world is shrinking, or that it's failing, right, in some way. Like the globe that he's in is, we had the idea of like making it look like it's disintegrating or cracking, and in fact I think there are some cracks on the album.
I'll have to look again.
But the idea that came to fruition was, what if instead of like frost or glass, what if it was water? And the idea that the bubble is shrinking, the way we could display that without having like a moving picture, it's actually leaking, it's dripping, and with every drop it gets smaller.
Right. Wow.
And that's part of the idea.
That's some serious high concept there.
Deep, bro.
Which, and I'm going to check on this. So like the first couple lines of the album, maybe the very first line, my memory's not that great, references Lakeview Drive. Now,
right,
based on what I'm hearing, based on what you guys are saying, I got to imagine everything is very intentional. And the choice of that name is a reference somewhere. Am I right about that?
Not necessarily to something internal to the album. It's a little more external. Yeah. I think that's mostly like my own sort of personal like reference to the fact that at the time that we started writing at this album, I was living in a lake house.
Okay.
And so I was sort of waking up every morning and seeing the lake. And so for me, whenever I imagined this house, this setting, it's always a house next to a lake.
Right.
And it just kind of makes sense that a road next to a lake would probably be called Lakeview Drive or something like that. The 42 part of it is just another Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's reference.
Fair enough. I wondered. So funny thing.
Exactly.
Funny thing here, because when I first saw that, I realized my brain in the moment was referencing something else. And the first thing I thought was, like, wait, isn't that a band? I realized later, Parkview Drive. But in the process of Googling Lakeview Drive, there is apparently a rather well-known Lakeview Drive that is also referred to as the Road to Nowhere.
What?
Right? That is sheer coincidence, but that is beautiful.
Right.
That's
I thought they gotta have intended that. They must be familiar with this, and they included it that way on purpose. But
he makes us sound so smart.
I wish we did. I so wish that was intentional. That would be so badass.
That's the universe. Once in a while, likes to play little coincidence games with us. So absolutely. I think that's pretty cool that they.
I love that. That's so cool.
The world just helped you out a little bit there. So we're gonna add this little bit of flourish here. But that's awesome. So the question I think a lot of us are going to have at this point is, are we getting to see you guys tour? Are we getting to see you live somewhere in the near future, maybe? Opening for Haken or Dream Theater?
I mean, one could only hope, right?
Yeah. Hey, maybe Dream Sonic can be an annual thing. They'll be, come back next year.
Hope so.
I think
that would be insane.
I think we have some things lined up that we can't really talk about yet.
Fair enough.
We do have some stuff coming.
I mean, hopefully we can talk about it in like a month or something. Something like that.
I mean, that's encouraging in and of itself. That means, yes, there is something.
Yes.
And all these signatures aren't where they need to be just yet. So
we're
pretty close to accurate
process.
Yeah.
The the mentality about like finishing the album like while we were in the studio was like, I think part of it was because it had taken so long and we were so eager to get it done. We were like, we're not doing anything else until we finish this.
Right.
Like no other preparations. Like honestly, even to the extent that we found ourselves in this awkward position once we had officially finished the mix and the master of the album. We were like, oh, okay, cool. We don't have art. Realistically, we probably should have been getting the art lined up like while we were doing that. But we didn't, because we were like, nope, we are singularly focused on finishing this after we've been working on it for so long. And the same is true for rehearsals. We were like, we're not even thinking about rehearsals until this is done and out. And now that it is, we've gotten in a couple rehearsals. We're sort of getting our gear together, trying to make the live show flow smoothly. And, you know, sort of having to go back and relearn a number of parts, because in some of the cases, they were notes that like we didn't touch for months or maybe even like a year after we recorded them. Yeah. And so there's been a lot of going back and having to relearn the album itself. So yeah, like the live show is absolutely going to happen. This isn't going to be a like a studio project only. No. We have a real love for playing in front of people, even if like most of our experience so far has been playing, you know, like in front of people in Charlotte. We really want to expand that out and play that in front of all of the people who love the album and Prog and stuff. So totally going to happen. Just a matter of like getting rehearsed to our satisfaction, because we're also not willing to, like, same perfectionist mentality. We're not willing to come out on stage and half-ass the live version of the album. It has to be, I don't know. It has to follow the expectation in the prog and in the metal world where you are able to replicate the album live. Yeah. It's got to sound convincing, especially because, you know, from like way back in the day when, I don't know, when everyone found out that Dragon Forces Through the Fire and Flames was recorded at half speed and then digitally sped up, and like everyone was so upset about that. I truly personally believe that was like a landmark moment where in the metal world now, like a big part of metal live shows is bands demonstrating that they can actually play what they recorded. Sure. Because studio magic is a beautiful and wonderful and dangerous thing. Yeah. I think it's become especially important for bands to be able to replicate what they played, so that people live can be like, okay, so they weren't, you know, so the album wasn't deceptive, that they can actually do this. And therefore we got to live up to that. So gotta be rehearsed first, for sure. Yeah.
You're talking to someone who's an old Rush head. So back in the day, that was my standard. Yeah. Is that you could come on stage and play the album as it was, as it was on the album live, and replicate that without too much sticking around, you know. Then of course they made Power Windows and kind of threw all that out the hell of the window. You know, like, we're going to make a studio album that we can't possibly reproduce live without backing tracks. Okay, thanks guys. You're kind of undermining my entire point here of judging other bands. Sorry.
It is a tough thing balancing the vision with the desire to replicate it live. Yeah. And I feel like there's always like concessions that have to be made, like, you know, when the guitarist has laid down a bunch of rhythm tracks and like layered them deeply, and there's also a lead track, there's a matter of having to figure out, okay, now what is the guitarist actually going to play live, since he can't possibly play all of those parts at the same time? Well,
the answer is make your bass player play 3 different things at the same time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There you go, Cole.
There you go.
Good up, bro.
Thrown down.
The bass, the keys, and the Moog pedals. Yep. I got to get on it.
That's what you did. But yeah, so that was always my standard. So yeah, my expectation is with a lot of people that if you're going to put it on the album, be able to play it live.
Fair enough.
And if you got to put it on the album and recorded it at slower speed and speed it up, chances are your life decisions have been poor. Yeah, the way I look at it. That's the problem. I can't believe I've gotten this far in life and never heard that before. That's funny. Oh well. Live and learn. Among other things I've
Right.
learned today too is that if I don't touch my mouse for long enough, despite the fact that I've got a video recording going on, my screens will go black on me. They will go to screensaver mode.
Oh, I wondered why
Yeah.
you were going
How-
ghost for a bit there. Yeah.
Honest to God, I think at one point in time I thought the whole system had shut down. I went, "What just happened?" But then I could still hear you. I went, "Oh, okay." That has literally never happened to me before. So
Fair enough.
live and learn. All right. Well, cool. My personal hope, not only is that you'll tour, is that you're going to hit the Philly area because I'd love to see you guys live. That would be excellent. But if you got any pull with the tour manager, tell them, get them out here.
I would say that's inevitable. We're
Good.
more likely to get up there. I mean, East Coast is that's where we are. That seems like probably the logical starting tour thing. I don't think we're going to start by immediately going out to the West Coast, though we would like to, obviously. So yeah, we totally plan to. I imagine it's probably going to start the way that it has to, like with a lot of other bands. We're going to have to work our way up and like play with various local acts in the cities that we go to. I mean, like we can dream about getting picked up and touring with a larger group. That would be beautiful and wonderful and magic. But I think it is reasonable for us to sort of echo the same sort of mentality that we have had with this album, which is that I don't know, go into it with low expectations and be pleasantly surprised. Like we knew we liked this album, we just didn't know if everyone else was going to as well. So I mean,
Seems like they mostly do.
we are happy to be pleasantly surprised if someone wants to come along and be like, "Hey, you want to go on tour?" Sure, yeah, why not?
Sure.
Yeah, I expect it's going to happen. I expect it's going to happen. So, guys, it has been my absolute pleasure. This is probably the longest interview I've done, and
I'm so sorry.
Honestly, it's one of those ones I'm looking at. I'm going, we could keep going easily, but I suppose at some point in time, you guys might have other things in life you want to get to.
Fair enough.
At some point in time, one of us is going to need to take a bathroom break. So at some point,
it's true,
right?
We were sort of trying to determine, which of us were going to be available to come have a chat and everything. And just your luck, you got the two most talkative of us.
I'll take that.
He's not wrong.
Yeah.
As I've said before, the people that'll listen to the podcast and watch the video are here for you guys. They're not here for my pretty face and my melodious voice. So the more you talk, the better.
Right
the more
on.
they're getting to know you. That's what we're here to do.
Well, Dave, we appreciate you having us, boss.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time, guys. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for getting in touch like you did. I'm glad we were able to work this out.
Totally.
Very cool, guys.
Absolutely.
It's been my absolute pleasure meeting you. I wish you the best with the album. It sounds like you're off to a roaring start already. Like you said, a song of the year, album of the year discussions already. It's been a big year for prog metal, and you guys have been one part of it. I hope you get to tour together soon. I hope that's successful. Best of luck, guys.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye.
As I said, longer than normal interview from me, but it was awesome. It was absolutely a great time. Flew by, so didn't seem all that long. Matter of fact, we probably could have talked for another hour just easily. So we'll save some stuff for the next time we get to talk, God willing, and hopefully get to see them very soon. Phil, Cole, I want to thank you very much for your time once again. I really appreciate you talking to me. I wish you the most success with the album and the tour coming up. Looking forward to seeing you guys live and looking forward to what you do in the future. So keep it up, guys. Great work. Meanwhile, you can check me out on the socials. You will see the links below. Instagram and Facebook and Threads and X, whatever the hell that is anymore these days. Don't forget to check out. I got a backlog of podcasts out there. The audio versions, you don't have to look at me in order to enjoy them. So you might want to check those out sometime. Here's some of the other people that I've been lucky enough to talk to. And hey, you get a chance, go to Live 365. Look up a little station called The Expanse. Think you might like it. All right, this is Super Dave, signing off.